the normal view here. And hi. Anyway, so I've asked delegates to convention to talk about not only why did they serve, but what did they get out of this last one, what was discussed, what they found interesting, all of those kinds of things. And so we've got Deb, who's zooming in from Albuquerque, and then Jim and Nan, and they will show up here. And then there were several of us, others of us who were there, so we might chime in. I know Karen was there, Nadine was there, and I was there. I don't know if anybody else was there being online. So it was virtual. Becky was there, who's just signing in, right, for some of it as well. So that's really all I have to say to start with. And I'll let Jim start because he's done this forever. But that doesn't mean that he gets to talk forever. But Jim has served in all sorts of different capacities. So anyway, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I actually, until about 10, 15 years ago, I was just involved with Good Shepherd. And about 10 years ago, I got involved with the state is divided into five different regions, and I got involved with High Plains region. And then 2 years after that, I was elected to the standing committee, which I served for 6 years as the secretary. And the nice thing about being on the standing committee, I didn't have to be a delegate from Good Shepherd because I was automatically a delegate. And so this year I went back and I actually went to Father Gary and asked if I'd like to be a delegate. I've always enjoyed, and in the capacity that I've served, I've made a lot of friends throughout the diocese. And although it's okay to do it virtually, I much more enjoy it when it's in person because you get to have side conversations with lots of people and so forth. And, it's been okay the last 2 years, and the diocese has done the best job they could, but it'll be great. Next year, they've already allocated money for us to go back to meeting in person. And we think, at least at this time, that it'll probably be held in Pueblo. So that's, you wanted to know why I'm serving and so forth. I'll let everybody else talk, and then I guess we can talk about what actually happened at this diocesan convention.
Well, I had been an alternate in the year that we elected our first female bishop to the diocese, and was just really honored to just be able to be there, even though I wasn't a voting member, and have been a delegate since then. And I find it really enlightening to see how businesslike and how well run the diocese is, how considered the decisions are made in terms of where our donations go. Each church provides a donation to the diocese as a part of what you give as an individual member, and how this is dispersed, how it's considered, the good that it's doing. And you get reports at the convention each year on all of the various benefactors from the funds that the diocese gives out, the various projects that they do, and how they are actually benefiting the community, and all of our new initiatives, this kind of thing. It has been very heartening to see how well run it is, how well considered the decisions are being made, and the amount of good that we are doing, the impact that you're having on individual lives around the state.
Deb,
do you want to talk about why you're a delegate?
I like Jim, have served on the High Plains Executive Committee, although I've not ever been on the standing committee. But through Congregational Development Institute and others, I too have had colleagues across the state, and convention always was a very nice time to be in touch with those colleagues across the state. However, unlike Jim, I liked the Zoom convention because we have talked over many years about how the church is run by affluent older people who can afford to go to convention. And by doing it on Zoom, it allowed people who otherwise could not afford the registration fees and the hotels and the food to participate in the business of the church. So I really was excited to see the Zoom version of convention happen. And I'm not particularly thrilled about going back in person for convention, but my views are kind of irrelevant since I'm no longer.
I put some stuff together. You can pass this out, but this is I put this outline together so you would have something to carry away. Becky and Deb, you won't, I didn't set this up so it could go on Zoom. So, and this just gives you, what actually happens at convention. I might take a second to say this. The bishop has a difficulty in trying to work the whole state. So she divides the state into 5 regions, and I'm going to give you a map here eventually, show you where the 5 regions are. But the regions then have something they call convocation, which meets about 30 days before the annual convention, and they do some business there. Then we come together for this convention, and this brings the whole church together. And if I remember correctly, there's about 350 delegates when you look at the delegates throughout the state. The number of delegates you have, you can see there under Good Shepherd, there was our clergy delegates, and then our lay delegates, and I hope I have that right. And Nan, were you actually a delegate or were you an alternate?
I'm not going to the delegate.
Okay.
I was a delegate to this convention.
Karen was.
Delegate there. Yeah.
And you'll see there, I put on the 3rd line, lay delegates based on average attendance. Our number for 2020 was 173, and that gave us 4 delegates. So that's how we had 4 delegates. So it's always based on your average attendance. You can see there were 8 workshops. I actually attended 3 of those. I'll be happy to share about those. And I think probably Karen and Nan might have attended different ones, as maybe Deb and Becky did. And even Sandra might have, come in on some of those. You didn't, okay. And then the opening worship, which is usually on Thursday evening, was held at Grace and St. Stephen's, and it was actually a concert for the human family. You can see the musical group there led by Corey Caldwell. He's a composer out of Nashville and wordsmith, and he's a rapper. It was interesting. I guess I'll just leave it there. I listened to it all, and it was interesting. Convention business, you can see there, standing committee elections, bishop's address. I highlighted that. She thanked everybody for everything that they've done in the last couple of years. The theme of her talk was God's grace is enough. And the one thing that I really caught my attention is she mentioned that there's a lot of clergy in this diocese that are exhausted from the last 2 years dealing with COVID. And I thought that was fairly important. I actually put lists on the back of there, and you can look and see the list of things, people that got thanked. And then finally, let's see, her Bishop's Cross, there was 2 of those. We've got the recipient of the Bishop's Cross last year sitting here among us. I won't mention names, but it was, I think it was Sandra Boyd, Reverend Sandra Boyd. And there was 2 this year, and they're listed there on the back of the sheet. And then they did talk about General Convention, which is coming up next year. I think the one thing that didn't startle us all, but we did not have General Convention this year. So next year will be 4 years between them. And then 2 years after that, we'll come together. And I'm not sure where it is yet, but that's when we'll elect a new presiding bishop. So that's coming up pretty quick. And so And, you know, and then I've also, you can actually still just go on to the website and type in the annual convention. And there's 14 booths that are on a virtual exhibit hall. And you can actually go in and visit all those exhibits. And some of them are really good. I listed some of them there, but if you have any questions about any of them, I've listed there for your information. So that's kind of, before I talk about the workshops, I'll let Nan or Deb share, you know, what came out of the convention for them.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Or if there's anything else they'd like to share.
Deb, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Go ahead and start, Nan.
Okay, well, the workshops had breakout rooms. So they started out with a presentation, and I guess probably each of the ones, at least the three that I was in, with the presentation. And then you went into smaller sessions of like 4 or 5 people to discuss and then bring that back to the whole group, which I found very useful because of the Zoom format in particular. Our own Nadine Pope was one of the presenters for one of the workshops that I've Seeking God's Heart in Prayer. And that was just, I found very fascinating. In ways of reaching out in prayer that may be non-traditional, not necessarily, you know, sit down and now I lay me down to sleep or Our Father, but other ways of engaging in prayer. It's part of your everyday life. It's part of just going through, you pass an accident on the road, you see someone on the side of the street, something that just triggers you and you just, a thought, a prayer that goes up for that. I also found the keynote address to be really very inspiring. I think she was the bishop from
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis, okay. She was in Boston at the time. She was online with us at 7 o'clock at night, our time. It was 9 o'clock in Boston, and she was running the Boston Marathon the next morning. So she was a very inspiring person all the way around. Just her whole commitment to life, really, to life and all that it holds, and living life to the absolute fullest as part of a requirement of living out our faith, is that we use our life to the best that we can use it to.
I liked that she shared how she came to be Episcopalian, because she was not a trained Episcopalian.
Yeah.
And it's always, as someone who was not cradle Episcopalian myself, I really like hearing from other people how they came to this particular denomination. And hers was a very inspiring story in that arena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was.
I attended 3 workshops. Let's see, creative ways of gathering God's people. I attended the one, creative ways of gathering God's people. Mike Orr, I don't remember who was with Mike on that one, but it was.
Wasn't it Greg?
Was it Greg? Oh yeah, Greg Forker was with him. And actually, the things they described, most of the things we've done here at Good Shepherd. They talked a lot about the Zoom, the YouTube, Facebook, every Sunday having the services on. They talked about, I think some churches have done Compline, like we have. A lot of churches are doing the morning gatherings like we did. And those are the type of things that they talked about in that one. And then they opened it up to a discussion of the whole group. The shared leadership in a changing church was really interesting because they had 3 panelists, of which 2 were from our church, Karen and Father Gary. And that surprised me just when I saw who the panelists were. The third person was from the church in Leadville and was talking about how they have turned their church into a church that is feeding people that need food in the whole community. And that was their emphasis. But, Karen and Father Gary, and I mean, I actually made copies of this and I'll hand them out, but you've all seen it. What was the hit with the most people was our chart, which kind of said, hey, as we went through this, part of the priest in charge process is a vision for Good Shepherd. And so this chart was shared there, and I think a lot of people were impressed with that. So I don't know how many of you have it. I mean, most of you probably have this, but I'll hand it out. And but I mean, Karen and Gary talked a lot about what's going on in our church, and it was interesting as a parishioner from the church to listen to them describing the things that were going on in our church. And they opened that one up at the end also. So they talked about different things that different churches have been doing. And I think the reason, in my reasoning, and I think this is correct, I think the reason Karen and Gary were there, they wanted to show the lay leadership and the clergy leadership and how they work together. And I thought Karen and Father Gary did a great job of representing Good Shepherd, and they were the main part of that. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. And it was interesting. I'm not sure I learned a whole lot more because it was from emphasis on our church, but I think it was well received by the community. And the last one I did was Legislation and Resolutions 101. And if you know me, you'd know why I did that, because that's right up my alley. Now, in regard to that, what I'm going to give you now is something that I put together a few years back. And I guess Nadine doesn't need one because she's I just gave her one last week. And this is interesting. We have always, I guess I have a really heart for the regions, and the diocese is trying to figure out what to do with the regions. And so this gives you some information. I think the two things that are the best information in here, this is a map that shows you all the regions. And if you go about 4 or 5 pages in, you'll see the map that shows all the regions. So you know exactly where they split out. And then the page behind that is a resolution and gives you an example of a resolution. And this is the basis for the church's, the mandatory 10% to the diocese and the suggested, what is the word? Encouraged to contribute an additional 5% to the regions. On the diocese, overall, we're at about 9%. On the regions, we're at about 2%. Good Shepherd is at 10% on the diocese and 1% on the regions. But the thing, I'll just say 2 or 3 things about this. Number one, in order to have a resolution in front of the committee, you have to have 12 signatures, and you'll see those on the back of that sheet. And you have to represent 3 different churches, and it has to be in 3 months before the annual convention. And a lot of people don't know why we give money to the diocese and the region. So this is a good one to have and to know about. And then if you, in the next page, if you want to see how big the regions are, there's the regional support and the diocesan support for 3 years. So it gives you a flavor for that. And the only reason I included that is because that probably is the biggest thing that they talked about in the legislation and resolutions. At the end of convention, we have a lot of courtesy resolutions that thank people for what they've done. And it's like the committee, the bishop, the presiding bishop, and so forth. And there's probably about 15 to 20 of those they put together. We did not have any major resolutions to vote on last year or this year. If you want my opinion, I think what's coming at you in the next few years, I think you will see a resolution to give 15% to the diocesan pledge. I think that's coming. That's my best guess. The reason I say that, under our previous bishop, He asked for 10% and he gave 10% to the national church. Our new bishop is moving towards 15%. And this year it's 14.5%. I think it'll be 15% and then they'll allocate money back to the regions. That's my prediction.
No, she didn't just decide to do the 15%. That's the national church is asking.
With 15%, right. And as a new bishop, as our bishop sitting here can probably say, she was under a lot of pressure to move it up. And I think she succumbed to the pressure, although we did it over 3 years. In other words, I don't remember exactly, we went 11.5 and then 13, and this year we're 14.5, and next year it'll be 15.
I wonder, given the news that came out of the National Church office within the last week, that they're trying to figure out what to do with the $12.1 million surplus, how well that's going to go over. So you might get 15%. So,
And
I
if,
expect that's because of COVID, though.
yeah.
Well, we have the surplus because we haven't been doing near as much.
Right.
Services.
Well, and I think those of you that don't know this, a few years ago, it used to be 19%.
Absolutely.
And they changed it over years down to 15%. So that's where we are now.
No, it's just a constant battle to figure out how to share the resources, it's like taxation, I suppose. That
Yeah.
how are you fair? We used to, in Iowa, it used to be like 20% because we had all these little tiny mission congregations that couldn't survive if the bigger
Right.
parishes didn't. And it was a requirement. If you didn't pay it, you lost your vote of convention. Well, that created an enormous amount of bad will, obviously. And so we went to a voluntary system and then people stopped doing it. It's not easy, but somewhere there's a balance in there. I think probably we can into 15% probably.
I think the conventions are always interesting. Like I said, you got the convocations meeting, then you have the conventions, and then you have the national church. I'm an alternate delegate, second alternate delegate for the general convention on the lay side. Colorado, well, every state has 4 clergy and 4 lay delegates. And interesting enough, they will pay, the diocese will pay for 4 delegates and the first alternate. So it'll be in Baltimore in July, and I'll be there. It's not part of this, but at some point in time, you've got 2 delegates. In fact, you got the lead delegate on the lay side in Larry Hitt. And so as convention gets closer, we'd be more than happy, Larry and I would be, to share with the congregation, hey, here are the issues that are coming up, and then happy to share after we come back, here's what happened.
And I will be there too.
Oh, that's right, Karen said.
I'm a board member of United Faith Offering. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm a board member of United Faith Offering, so I will be at General Convention as a visitor. I will be going to hearings and listening to issues, particularly the Indian boarding schools issue that has been coming up. So I can share my experience too.
This won't surprise anybody, but I'll be going to the budget hearing. The total budget. I've offered to do that. Yeah.
I wanted to back up a little bit to the business about the diocesan and the region. Over the years, that's been a bit back and forth, and the region actually delegates to local missions that apply for money.
Yeah, if you look at the big handout I gave you, about 5 pages after that, you can actually see, I put in there where our money is going. We have about $130,000 a year, and we will this region. And last year we gave to 19 different outreach, churches and outreach. But I think Chris mentioned that the diocese was supporting churches. In this region, the diocese doesn't have any money to support the region, so it's really being done on a regional basis. And so, I mean, the average parishioner sitting in the pews has no idea of what goes on in the region. And that's a shame, because it's a huge outreach that we do throughout our region. And the average parishioner should know that and really feel good about it.
Are they feeling that they'll get more resources into the regions by having it all delegated to the diocese?
I don't think so. I think we'd stay in probably the same range. Okay, I'm gonna say something. This is, stay right here. The reason I think that's gonna move in that direction, right now, you've got 94 churches and full churches and missions. And you've got about half of them that are given 10 and 5. And most of those are the smaller churches. I think by going to the 5th, there's a lot of churches that have figured out if you give 10% to the bishop, to the diocese, the diocese will leave you alone. And so I think, the region, it just isn't as well supported as it should be. And, the language in there, if you noticed, it was encouraged, it wasn't mandated. And so I think if they went to the 15%, the diocese is going to realize pretty quick they can get a lot more money in.
And I think Jim and I both had a lot of experience on the regional committee of who supports the Episcopal Service Corps.
Yeah.
Well, they're physically resident in this region, so this region has to fund them. That whole battle of which region funds which ministry, and that got really confusing. And I think maybe that might be clarified by
Having one
donations coming through the bishop's office. Also, I wanted to call everyone's attention to the fact that if you go to episcopalcolorado.org, which is the diocesan website, you can watch every one of the workshops that was offered. And Jim loves his legislative. And I also enjoyed watching Karen and Gary and the woman from Leadville. But I probably got the most benefit to myself from the session Seeking God's Heart, Prayer as the Beginning, which was done by the interim rector at Christ the King in Arvada. And that kind of paired beautifully with another session, Rebuilding Our Webs of Care, which really had a lot to do with the impact of COVID on clergy and parishioners. And both of those are available, all of them, excuse me, are available on that website. So if there was a subject covered that you wish you could have attended, you can see how it was handled.
And I may be wrong, but I think most of the other ones are also still up. They were talking about leaving everything up for 1 year so people could go back in and see the opening and the address from Bishop.
They are still up, yes.
Yeah. Any questions you have of us? Yes.
Do we have a companion diocese relationship with an overseas diocese?
No. We do not at this time.
Have you ever?
I don't know. Do you know, Gary? I don't know that we've ever had that.
It's interesting because most dioceses do,
Right.
often in Africa, but it's
We
one way.
we did have a significant relationship through the
with
three bishops with the Petit Niptitro. Petit
Haiti.
Nip, whatever that is in
Yeah.
Haiti.
Haiti.
In Haiti, right?
Yeah. We work with Haiti quite a bit.
I think it's one way the Anglican Communion has been able to hang together during our periods of stress and strain, because we had some personal one-on-one relationships without all the issues. We knew each other and we had support each other in mission and ministry.
Yeah, our prior bishop was very much involved in the Haiti ministry, and he went over there several times. And it's been really difficult for our new bishop because she came on and then we got almost immediately into the pandemic, and Normally she would be making visits, personal visits to most of the churches and getting to meet some of the people.
Sure.
And she's done some of that at outside worship. She's done some of that virtually, but she probably, it's just takes a while for her to get to know everybody.
You bet.
Yeah. And as you probably know, we're a very diverse diocese. The Northwest and the Southwest are significantly different than the two that are right here in the big city. And you may notice on the standing committee, it's one lay person and one clergy person from each region. So you have 10 people on the standing committee, and it actually pretty much represents the whole state because of that. But you can see that the two regions that are right here, High Plains and Front Range, are the big regions.
It's actually a good way to do it, to have the regions represented on the standing committee. That's not true in many dioceses. So whoever gets elected just gets elected, and it could be from the sea city or from the, the power structure, as it were, and the people who are from the more rural areas or on the, western slope feel left out.
And they just keep getting reelected.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And those elections really take place at the regional convocation. The final election takes place at the diocesan convention, but it's more a matter of confirming who the regions have put up.
Selected.
Yeah.
I came to Colorado from the Diocese of California, which, is 5 counties, all 4 or 5 counties all surrounding Alcatraz. And they shifted while I was there, they shifted to a one-day convention because they could. Because everybody could get to the cathedral and go home. They could do it on a Saturday. Nobody had to miss a Friday work, and all the priests could be back in their pulpits on Sunday morning. So it wasn't this
Stretched
big,
out.
and it meant also that you could have greater diversity in who the delegates were. And so I think that the point that you're talking about in terms of the lay delegate and clergy delegate, each one from the region, levels that playing field in a way that Chris was talking about in some ways, but also addresses some of the things that Deb has said. We cannot have a one-day convention here unless we were to do it as we have been doing it virtually.
Yeah.
But if we're going to do it in person, you can't do it. And so you're caught between a rock and a hard place. And maybe we've figured out, because of COVID, how we might be able to manage some of this in a hybrid way. Those who can be in person can, and those who cannot don't have to be, but it shouldn't be a tiered system that if you're only in person, do you get to vote, or something like that. But I think, as Jim pointed out, and I know that Chris knows this, and anybody who's been at a convention, is that it's the conversations in the hallways. It's all of those chance meetings, conversations at the booths, in the exhibit hall. We've got a virtual exhibit hall, but there's no real opportunity to have a conversation with anybody there. It's all of that's really part and parcel of the convention that you can't do virtually. So there's got to be a way to sort of mix it up and allow both things to happen. But it is fascinating to see the business of the church. I came from 2 other dioceses where there were always a lot of resolutions, and sometimes they were sort of pro forma, but other times they got pretty heated. And I certainly remember them a lot when there were questions about issues of sexuality. And I'll say this just and then shut up. But one of my mentors in campus ministry was a guy by the name of Earl Brill. He was the Episcopal campus minister at Duke when I started. And he'd been in that diocese for a long time, published author, brilliant guy, really, really wonderful. He never said anything at conventions. And I was sitting next to the guy who preached my ordination sermon, and Charlie nudged me, he said, "Earl's standing up." The point being, if Earl speaks, everybody listens, because he just never speaks, but everybody trusted him to have something good to say. So, they're interesting to see how people think and where the passions lie and all of that. it's a great picture of the church.
Mhm.
And a reminder for those of us who, whichever individual bubble or bubbles we live in, that they're not the only bubbles on top of the water, that there's a whole lot else going on.
Two thoughts that came out of that. Number one, this may be for any of you that are new to the diocese. We rotate the annual convention between three areas. Denver will always have it 1 year. But for example, I think next year it would either go to Colorado Springs, Pueblo, or we have gone north to the Budweiser Center up there. Those are the three locations that get it probably every third year. And the other one is Grand Junction. We go to Grand Junction. So I think it's going to go Pueblo, Grand Junction, and back to Denver. Now, that may change. And then when it goes like to Pueblo, it might next year, one time it might go to Colorado Springs. And then another time, instead of going to those two, it might go up north to Budweiser. But Denver and Grand Junction are the primary locations. And that does two things. It makes it more difficult for a lot of people to attend, because all of a sudden when you're sending a delegation, and historically Good Shepherd has not paid for that. So you're paying for your own travel and everything else. So when you're going to Pueblo, or if you're going to Grand Junction, it's a lot harder to get delegates. One, they got to give up work if they're younger. And number two, they're paying their own way. And there was what was the other thing I was going to say? I don't remember now. Okay, but that's how it rotates around. And so, like I said, next year, to the best of our knowledge, we think it's going to be in Pueblo, depending on if the curve turns over. I think one of the things struggling with the churches right now is the curve going up for COVID-19, whereas I think most of us thought by December 1st, we'd be out of this, we'd be not wearing masks and so forth. And everything now looks like we'll be wearing masks. And so it has an impact on the church. You can see the Sunday attendance here. I mean, as an example, my wife has said, when we no longer have to wear a mask, I'll consider coming back. And I think there's a lot of people in the church that are of that attitude. So.
Karen, you want to see Becky? We see your name. You don't have to turn your camera on. But if there's anything, as somebody who has also served as a delegate, if there's anything that you would like to say, either one of you.
I was not a delegate this time. I have been in the past, including for our Episcopal election. And it really is a honor to represent Good Shepherd as a lay delegate. And I appreciate all of you who attended this year. And coming back, I think it's really, really important to come back and tell Good Shepherd about this. This information needs to be distilled and somehow pushed out to our congregation. And also for our general convention, I think Jim and I went to the last one. I went with UTO and you went as a visitor, and we came back and wrote up an article about our experiences, and it was fantastic. We went to a revival with the presiding bishop, and that was interesting.
Especially where we were sitting.
So coming back in 2022, that would be important. And then again in October, who goes to Colorado convention should come back
and share, right?
Yeah.
One, back in the day, we put on a diocesan-wide session on a Saturday at the cathedral, where everybody who'd been delegates to general convention shared about that. It was wonderful. It was wonderful to put that together too.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think those of us that go are happy to share. I mean, it's a significant experience. And
It seems like there used to be sessions the next October, or the October right after the general convention. There used to be convention sessions where the people reported back from what had happened at the national convention. That's kind of fallen by the wayside in the last few years.
we haven't met for 4 years. So.
Well, I mean, the previous convention, national convention, there were no reports that following year. But they had been, I went to a lot of those sessions. It was fascinating to me.
Yep, is Becky there?
Becky, anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, I was, thanks for including me.
He's not
I
muted
keep-
now.
I keep losing my voice, so that's why I'm not really participating, but I want to echo what everyone says. I've gone to convention a lot of times, most often in an official capacity for things I've done for the diocese or St. Francis Center. They also, agencies of the diocese also get delegates. But I think it's really hard to capture adequately what happens at convention, not only the side conversations, but even the actual presentations. So I think one of the biggest changes for me that's a positive is that the diocese is able now, because we've had to record things and do things virtually, is that people can go back and watch things themselves and hear it firsthand. I think that's really important. So the whole laity can actually hear it themselves, because we all have our own filters, and some of it, there's so much going on, you just can't capture it all. So I would encourage everyone to go onto the diocesan website and pick and choose what seems interesting to you, and get a flavor of what it's like. Because only so many people can go as a delegate, and as our parishes shrink, we get less and less delegates that are able to go. But anyway, that's all I wanted to share, is that I think it's real important for people to hear firsthand, and now we have an opportunity for people to be able to do that. So thanks.
Thank you,
Something that
Becky.
was new, I think, this year was the Compline service that was held. Was that Friday night
Yeah.
during the convention? I think
Mhm.
that was new. I don't remember having a Compline service in the past. And it was
I just
said by the Daughters of the
I just remembered the other thing I was going to share. One of the questions to Larry Hitt in the resolution section is, why has there been so few resolutions in the last few years? And basically what he said is 10 to 12 years ago, we had a lot of controversy in this diocese between conservatives and liberals, which are now called what, progressives and orthodox. But anyways, in that period of time, we had a lot of resolutions that would show up on both sides, and it became quite contentious. Bishop O'Neill spent 10 years trying to pull this diocese back together, and recognizing we got a lot of different opinions throughout the diocese. And I think he did a pretty good job. And I think that's reflected on less resolutions and less controversy in the last few annual conventions.
I think that's really true, and it's happened all over the church. We were just so torn apart during the sexuality debates and others, and civil rights, you go back, women's ordination, whatever the issue might be. And so we did this by battle of resolutions rather than maybe sitting around the table and actually
Talking about
praying and talking with each other. And so it got to be a negative. And so people began not doing resolutions, and bishops would discourage resolutions. The downside of that is that you don't have a way for the church to speak its mind on a particular issue. When I was going to the State House and in Iowa, for example, on the death penalty, it was really helpful for me to be able to quote a resolution from the Episcopalians in Iowa opposing, or General Convention resolutions. People get tired of having all these resolutions, but sometimes it does give you a concise way to say this is what this church stands for and believes. So again, it's all a question of balance. You don't want to get overly torn apart by resolutions, but we do need a way to express our common mind.
I serve on the diocesan task force for creation care, and we were talking about trying to push a resolution to our convention that would, I think the language is memorialize General Convention to act on something that they had not acted on in 2018, and that being adding the petition in the baptismal covenant for creation care. And so we had talked about that in the task force, and then heard back from the staff person in the bishop's office that they weren't going to consider resolutions this year, but they're going to talk about how to consider resolutions going forward. But this is not necessarily a controversial one. It's a question of not dividing the church. It's just telling, saying in Colorado, we would like General Convention to actually act. So they don't have to be contentious or anything like that. And so I hope we can get back to it. On the other hand, there is that sense of, resolutions leading to a vote needs tyranny of the majority often. And so that may not be the best way to do it. But, that's what we do. It's better than the Quakers who think about something for 17 years or longer.
If there's any resolutions, I think that might come up in the next annual convention, it may have to do with minorities. The difficulty has been Bishop O'Neill got hit over the head every year with speeches about what are you doing with the Hispanics and the African Americans and even the American Indians and Asians. In response to that, he brought on 2 Hispanic ministers in the diocese. Unfortunately, we've let one go, and the one Hispanic minister that we have is now handling American Indians and African Americans and Asians and Hispanic. Again, just leave this comment here, but it's my personal comment. Somebody can't handle all those, and something's going to have to be done. So you may see some resolutions in that area where people are concerned.
And I might point out that it was in paying the salaries for those Hispanic clergy that the Great Plains region kicked in a good chunk of change, like 30,000 each year for 3 years. So that was another example of something that the region did that had significant impact.
I'll give you a piece of information just for your information. St. Luke's used to be an Episcopal Presbyterian church owned 50-50. In 1984, they sold it. And rather than take the proceeds from it, they take a grant every year. And that grant, you'll notice on the back of my sheet, is going to be hospital. Yeah, it's going to be $850,000 for example next year. So it's a significant grant coming into the diocese to help pay the cost of the diocese. The other thing, I'll give you a personal story for me here, because a couple of weeks ago, we went down to St. Francis Center when they opened up their latest facility, which is in Capitol Hill area. They actually purchased an old Methodist church called the Warren United Methodist Church in Capitol Hill, and they've completely redone it inside. There's 48 rooms for the homeless, a beautiful kitchen in the old sanctuary, and so forth. St. Francis, there are 9 diocesan institutions under the Episcopal Church in Colorado. One of those happens to be St. Francis Center. The amazing thing is St. Francis Center's annual budget is $5.4 million compared to the diocese at $3 million. They have learned how to get money, grants from the government, from the state, and so forth to do these facilities. This one that just opened, it cost them $9 million to completely redo that facility and take homeless people off the street. And it was completely paid for before they opened the door. They've done 3 like that, and Tom Lewins, who is the head of it, hinted to me that they have an idea for doing a 4th one. That is great information that ought to be shared in our church, because people are always going, well, what are you doing about the homeless? Well, we have an agency here that is doing that. The most impressive information I got out of that meeting, for the year 2022, there are 28 different entities that are either under construction or have been permitted that'll take another 1,500 homeless people off the streets. So there's a lot going on there that I think is pretty impressive.
Any other thoughts, questions about diocesan convention or maybe even diocesan structure?
Well, I just wanted to support what Jim is saying about St. Francis Center and the work they've done to put all these pieces together to do all of these facilities. It's astonishing and amazing. And a lot of people don't know about it.
Yeah, well, I'll bet you 99% of our people sitting in the pews don't know anything about that.
I think from the diocesan level down to the regional level, to the very parish level and division level, we don't do a good job of sharing our good news. We talk about the problems, We don't talk about the successes,
Yeah.
and we really need to laud those successes.
And we've got a lot of them out there.
We have a lot of them out there.
Nadine,
Well, I can't be quiet about this, but from more of an advocacy perspective, I saw a report last week at the Centennial Faith Collaborative, or whatever it's called, but it's a group of faith leaders in Centennial. And there is housing. We already have enough housing, temporary housing for the homeless in the Denver metropolitan area. The issue that we need to really be thinking about and working toward is the fact that that's temporary housing. You give people jobs. They don't get paid enough to go move anywhere because we don't have any housing for them to go to.
Mhm.
So we got the temporary fixes in place. Now we really need to start hitting the institutions and the, exactly, and the developers and all of those folks and just say, you know, humankind. That's my approach. My naive approach is think about human beings, but it takes a hit on our economy, obviously.
Mhm.
So anyway, I'll get off my.
thank you.
That's what you're here
That's
for.
really nice.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and the only reason I said what I said is I think the general feeling is the typical parishioner in this church would have no idea of that we're even doing anything in the homeless area.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
thank you.
We'll change that.
Well, I wish we could figure that out for the whole Episcopal Church. I think we're the best kept secret in town. We've just never somehow able to let our light shine in a way that.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to when you're looking at the systemic causes, which is how you're actually going to resolve the homeless issues, is looking at the systemic causes of homelessness. And when we start looking at systemic causes, then the tendency is to back away because it seems political. And we need to educate ourselves on how that works.
What it means to address the systemic issues,
Yeah.
right?
It
What
seems,
that means.
it seems political. It seems political. It also seems overwhelming in its scope.
Yeah.
And people tend to back off because that's way beyond my pay grade, whatever that may be.
Well, and we live out in the suburbs, and so it's not our problem.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's not
it's-
my opinion, but I mean, that's what a lot of people say.
Your backyard isn't that big. Well, Nan, Jim, Deb, thank you. Thank you to Becky for chiming in, and Karen as well, and for all of the questions. I agree, this is being recorded on Zoom, so we can make this available. It's not going out on YouTube. We can protect it. You know? So that your comments that stay in this room.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that, yeah, we do need to let people know, and just like making sure that people know what's the conventions.
Even in terms of graphics, that's a good way to present material, maybe looking forward to our annual meeting.
Mhm.
To move on.
Yep.
Some kind of infographic.
And even, I think, putting out more publicity about how individuals, parishioners can get in. I mean, it's there, but you got to go hunt to find it. How can you find, and what are the pluses of going to, of attending the meetings, even if you're not a delegate, of just seeing what's going on, listening to the speeches and taking part in the workshops and seeing all that's going on around and how things develop and how the work of the church is being done. And that's something everyone could benefit by, and many people would be interested in. With Zoom, it's a low-cost,
Mhm.
easy access,
Mhm.
but we don't really publicize and blow that out to everybody and say, hey, don't forget tomorrow, log on tomorrow night. We've got compline tomorrow night for the whole diocese. We've got this meeting, we've got that meeting going on. Get that blasted out to everybody throughout the diocese, not just the parish or just the region, but throughout the parish, to let people know what's going on and how, so that everybody can be encouraged, so that those who have some interest can, even if they don't get the whole thing, can get parts of it that they may be available for, or that they're specifically interested in.
And the follow-up on that is we used to elect our delegates at our annual meeting, but that's 9 to 10 months before it happens. So in the last few years, we've tried to wait till 2 or 3 months before. And
Then the vestry links.
yeah,
Anyway, thank you all. Really appreciate it.
thank you.
Yep. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Becky.
Good to see you all.
Happy unpacking, Dad.
Yeah, we haven't got together yet.
The camera's back here.
Yeah.